To see what's making headlines in today's papers in our news review. Today we're joined by the iPaper's Global Affairs correspondent, Molly Blackall. Morning, Molly.
Morning.
I mean, there's only one real big story on the front pages of every single paper. Of course, it's the war in Iran and the fallout, really, from all of this, including the front page of the Times. PM is no Churchill. This was coming from Donald Trump and his frustrations around Keir Starmer. But added to that, he was hosting the German Chancellor, wasn't he? But he also attacked Spain's leaders. So it was an all-out, frustrating rant from the president, which we're used to seeing.
I was going to say, Trump is not a man to mince his words, so I think we're used to hearing directly what he thinks. But it's the kind of latest sort of tension point between the UK and the US, which obviously has that historic special relationship, which has really been tested since Donald Trump came back into the White House. This is all over the UK's sort of slight resistance to being involved directly in what the US is doing in Iran. The US and Israel this weekend launching massive airstrikes across Iran, of course, killing Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah. And the UK has been quite quick to say, all we're doing here is defensive action. We're just going to get involved in protecting our own bases and our allies, but we're not going to be actively involved in any of this. There has been a little change in position the last couple of days, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But for Trump, all of this seems to be too little, too late. So he's really trying to hit Starmer where it hurts by comparing him unfavourably to the most sort of famous British Prime Minister, and it's the latest sort of tension that the White House and Number 10 are facing. Obviously, we've had battles over tariffs. They have a natural ideological difference, but it's really not the assessment that Starmer wants right now domestically. You know, he's not known for his charisma. He's not known for being a personality, and particularly with the May local elections coming up, the by-election loss in Gorton and Denton, I think it's just another negative headline for Starmer, which he'll really be wishing the US president sort of hadn't said.
It'd be interesting to see the fallout and if there is any reaction from Number 10 on this and whether they quietly just, you know, carry on. Because if you think of that special relationship, it's so deep, isn't it? It's, I think it was John Bolton that was describing it as this iceberg. So there may be chinks on the top, but beyond that, it's so deep-rooted. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, that's always what people say, sort of particularly when with the tensions over NATO, you know, you talk to military leaders and they always say all of this is at a political level, an operational level, you know, relations between the UK and the US always stay the same. But it's hard not to see how these things sort of chip away, at very least, at the goodwill between those two leaders, because this is kind of hurtful stuff to be saying out loud.
Yeah, and it does speak to, I suppose, Donald Trump's framing of, you know, he came from The Apprentice. He's this businessman that has suddenly taken global affairs to personal relationships and how he feels and the vibe. But I tell you what is feeling a vibe, it's the markets and it's the front page of the Financial Times and how, you know, oil prices are surging. That will hit petrol pumps, that will hit energy bills eventually. So it's the trickle down and it's the web of what we're seeing in Iran and how it affects everyone.
Totally. These things can sometimes feel sort of far away or isolated. But while the people in Iran and across the Middle East really are, of course, at the coalface of this, are the most directly affected, this does illustrate, the front page of the Financial Times, how far-reaching the effects of these kind of conflicts are. So the price of natural gas and of oil has been sort of skyrocketing recently. On Monday, Qatar Energy, which is one of the world's biggest exporters of natural gas, said it was halting production because of military strikes on its facilities. Oil prices have also jumped because we've seen attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 20% of the world's oil and gas travels through, so a hugely important shipping lane. And when those attacks start, you know, the cost of passing through that strait, the risk that people are having to take, soars those oil prices. And as you say, that has an effect at home. So I think this shows, you know, really, while it's all happening in the Middle East, it does have a knock-on effect for consumers in the UK, and it will be yet more alarming news at a time when people are already feeling, you know, the cost of living by their energy bills are already way higher than they want them to be. And sadly, this threatens to have a knock-on effect on that too.
Yeah, and the other element to all of this is, as we say, who gets drawn in to the conflict, and we've seen the fallout with Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister, and it was all related to the Akrotiri base in Cyprus, because that was hit. The runway was initially hit by a drone.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. There's a really interesting article in The Guardian that focus on, well, the warships are heading, to defend waters in Cyprus, but also the personal fears and worries of people on the island, and how Cypriots are actually feeling. So this is a huge base. It's in the south of Cyprus, close to Limassol, and it's central to, isn't it, to UK military operations in the Middle East. And it's been the base for many operations over the years, but it's really woven into island life, actually. We've got family there who have told us, who live 2 hours away from Limassol in the Troodos Mountains, in a small village in Kakopetria. And they're telling me, they're saying, actually, we're really quite worried about this. It's our tiny island. We're caught in the midst of potential fallout from a war that isn't that far away. You've got Lebanon really close by, of course, Israel too. And I think this take in The Guardian that puts this small island in the thrust of the conflict is close to my heart, but really interesting too.
Totally. I mean, that's the thing that can get lost in the headlines about, the kind of big geopolitical picture of all of this, is that it's always humans and often civilians who are paying the price for this. I mean, as you say, this is a great example, this small community at the epicenter of something that it never signed up for. But also with the headlines, which we've seen, the horrible headlines from Iran, where a missile has appeared to hit a girls' school, killing more than 100 people. It does show the human cost of all of this. Akrotiri, as you say, the base has been hit by a drone. It's not yet known exactly where that drone came from, but potentially Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we did see also that military families have been moved off the site now, so they've been moved into other accommodation around Cyprus. So they'll be joining, families like yours off that base to try and keep them safe. But it's one of several near misses for UK families. Bahrain, there were UK troops who were just 200 metres away from a blast. In Iraq, they were 400 metres away from a blast. So the tentacles of this conflict are spreading so far. There's so many communities around the world who are going to be affected by this.
And, conversations around, and if we just show the front page of the Daily Mirror, conversations around whether, this is another forever war, whether it's a rerun of the Iraq war, worries about that. We know that Donald Trump has said that, this potentially will last 4 to 5 weeks, but there's so much uncertainty around that. Meanwhile, Enter the Dragon, the front page headline on the front page of the Daily Mirror. If you're heading out, you're catching up on the news this morning, whether it's on your tablet, phone, or picking up a copy before you jump on the train or tube. This is worrying, isn't it? These images are really quite stark.
Totally. I mean, I think people are always alarmed to see this kind of large-scale deployment. I mean, it has been a few days in the running. The UK has kind of wavered on how involved it's going to be. It's trying to remain outside of any kind of offensive strike. So it's saying that this warship is going there for defensive purposes. But it has said that the UK's military bases can now be used by the US to launch attacks on Iranian missile sites. So that also just edges the UK a little bit closer to this conflict. I mean, I think the forever war point is such an interesting one. I think in the UK, we're very sensitive to that because of, history, but also in the US, it'll be really interesting to see how this plays with Trump's base, because Trump was elected on a promise not to embroil the US in any forever wars. I mean, that was a huge part of his pitch. A lot of his voters backed him because they didn't want to see large-scale US involvement overseas. And now already, since he's been in power, I mean, just this year, we've had Venezuela, we've now got what's happening in Iran, and I think lots of people in the UK and the US will be alarmed to see these kind of images kind of coming back around. This is not necessarily what people voted for.
No, absolutely not. And also how much the war then impacts. We've spoken about the financial implications of oil prices, but also the Chancellor and that spring forecast statement yesterday, which on some levels, I suppose she wanted it to be this low-key event, if not boring, to mark it and move on. And her whole statement was to look ahead, say, look, I am safe hands. I do have the right plan. Stick with us. We're going to make it work. But it's hard to see that in the backdrop of what's happening globally.
Totally. I mean, there's a really important line, I think, buried in the iPapers report here, a few paragraphs in, is talking about how, you know, the assessments now are saying that there'll be lower inflation in the coming years, you know, this is positive. But it notes that none of these forecasts are taking into account all of the stuff that we've just talked about. You know, the oil prices spiking, natural gas prices spiking. And it's really hard to have a conversation about the UK economy based on forecasts which now have just become totally out of date. So you're totally right. I think she wanted it to be a low-key event. It was almost a non-event in terms of the news because of where the attention has been. I don't think I've seen a budget receive less attention perhaps than yesterday's did. The headline really was that the UK is still on course to have the highest tax burden since the Second World War. The Chancellor obviously saying this is necessary to get us out of the financial sort of predicament that we've been in. But as you say, when you take that in with all the news that we're seeing around oil and gas prices, I think it will be a little bit of a worry for people.
And the other side of it is people who feel like, you know, we live in this social media age, don't we, where we want quick results. We watch those 30-second videos on TikTok and that gratification, that dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And you don't get that in politics. You know, it takes a huge amount of time to make real change.
Yeah.
And that's what I suppose will be hurting the government potentially in the May elections, who knows. But yeah, talking of social media, actually, the Daily Mirror, they're running this poll talking about that ban, that Australia-style ban on social media for under 16s. Interesting numbers, I thought, here. I'm a parent. I think there are lots of parents that I talk to that say they're in favour of it. Their latest poll say 86% agree with a ban, which was actually from the northeast. So they've sort of geographically, they've marked it up, and there's a big push for it, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. So they're saying, you know, up to 8 in 10 Brits would support this ban, which would obviously be modelled on what we've seen in Australia, where under 16s are banned from accessing content from 10 social media sites, which includes Facebook, Snapchat, etc., etc. And it all comes amid concerns over the impact, really, on mental health and social engagement that social media is having. You know, you mentioned the kind of attention issue. You know, it does promote quick results and kind of constant gratification, and it is designed, those algorithms, to keep people on those apps as long as possible. And there's been serious concerns about how that's affecting brain development, mental health, well-being. Obviously, we've seen the father of Molly Russell this week talking. She died following an act of self-harm, and that was linked to the online material that she'd been consuming.
And his whole take on it is really interesting, because he was saying, actually, he doesn't really support a ban. He understands why parents are calling for it. But what he was saying, essentially, was that it's better to come down harder on social media companies for their accountability. Molly, great to have you on today. Really appreciate this conversation. That's all from me. After the break, you'll have Ridge and Frost with all the latest headlines.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?